My mom's side of the family is fairly vast. She has 3 brothers and 3 sisters, all of whom are married and have several kids of their own. It goes without saying that when summer rolled around and it was time for the annual family function, there would be endless hours of fun and entertainment. My grandparents were fairly wealthy individuals, and with a share of their fortune each year they would rent out a lake house, cabin, or beachside mansion for our family to resort at in its entirety. Each home usually had several stories and a countless number of unique little additions that made the experience that much more memorable. For the year in question, my grandparents decided to rent out a large 4-story lakeside home. It was complete with a dock, game room, movie theater, vast kitchen, and even a tube slide system that went from floor to floor. What was supposed to be a blissful escape would soon become home to one of the worst memories to date. Before we delve any deeper into the story, I would like to do a quick explanation of the layout of the home because it's pertinent to understanding the rest of the story. The house was built upon a very steep slope that led down to a lake. The house was literally built horizontally off of the side of the hill, so on the part of the home that wasn't connected to the hill, there were long stilts that connected the house to the base of the home to the bottom of the hill. For additional support of the home, brick was added in between the stilts, creating a vast canaveral-like room underneath the home, only accessible by a cellar door at the bottom floor of the house. This pit/room had no insulation, obviously, dirt floors which in reality was just the bottom of the hill, and filled with spiders and other small rodents and such. It was highly recommended by the homeowners who were renting the property from that we don't venture down into this area, because it would be a 10 or so foot drop to the floor and no ladder for assistance returning to the bottom floor of the home, so anyone to go into this place would practically be imprisoned in a tall, dark cement hole. Okay, back to the story. After all the pleasantries with my family and settling in for the first couple of nights, all the more mature members of the family, which included me, my brother, and all my aunts, uncles, and their significant others, decided to play a game commonly known as sardines. The game is basically inverse hide-and-seek, where there is one hider and the rest of the players are seekers. All the lights in the home are turned off, creating an atmosphere of complete blackness. The hider is given a minute to hide, and once they are settled in, the seekers begin their hunt. If a seeker happens upon the hider, then they silently slip away and hide in the same place as the hider until all people are hidden and only one seeker remains. Now that you have a quick synopsis of the game, house, and a large number of people playing, you can see how this could be the perfect concoction for a fun time. My Uncle Mike was the one selected to do the hiding first. We shut out all the lights in the home, and after the given minute of hiding, the hunt was on. My brother, aunts, and uncles and I searched the first couple of floors to no avail. Searching under each table, in each closet, and behind each couch. After about 15 minutes of searching and nobody seemed to have found him, an idea sprouted in my head. Though I dismissed the thought at first, I couldn't stop thinking about that cellar door and that space that lay beneath the home. Being that I was on the younger end of the family, around 17 or so, I wanted to impress them by being the first one to find him. So I silently crept away from the group and seekers and down the last 2 stories I had to go get to the bottom floor of the house where the cellar doors were. When I got there, I found my body physically shaking with adrenaline, and after opening the door that closed off the little closet-sized room that held the cellar doors, I was trembling with fear. They looked just so ominous in the dark lighting. I walked up to them and placed a hand on each of the handles. Before I even opened the door, I was able to hear scuffling and maniacal giggling from the room. This assured me even more that I had got him, and my fear went to excitement when I learned of his presence. I flung the doors open and looked down into the dark abyss of the hole. I quietly whispered down at my uncle, telling him that I had found him and that I was going to drop down and join him. He just kept laughing and laughing, which really unnerved me because it was unlike him to do that sort of thing, without at least admitting he'd been found or telling me to join him. Really wanting to be the first seeker to find him, I slowly began lowering myself down into the hole, hanging on to the edge of the cellar door and letting my feet dangle into the hole. Stupid, I know. I could hear his laughter getting louder and heard his footing shifting as he began to walk closer to me. A horrid stench assaulted me the second that I lowered the rest of my body into the hole. I still clung to the cellar door, not allowing myself to drop the extra 5 or so feet to the floor just yet. Being that I was closer to the ground now, I could start to begin to see his shape, and it looked off. I couldn't make out facial features, but seeing his slouched posture and lanky arms made me hold on to the ledge of the ceiling door for a moment longer in hesitation. In that moment, I heard my aunt's voice calling for me, telling me that they had all found my uncle and that I was the last to find him. My mind didn't piece the two together instantly, but when it did, saying I could feel my heart sink to my stomach wouldn't be an exaggeration. The immense, overwhelming fear that I felt in that moment I have yet to ever feel again. Without a moment's hesitation, I pulled myself up out of the hole and instantly ran to my aunt calling for help, screaming about a man underneath the house. She looked confused at first, but sprung into action when she too heard the laughing from the hole. She called my uncles down while she phoned the police and gave them a quick description of the man, but because we were in the middle of nowhere, it took them about 25 minutes to arrive. When they finally did, it was a flurry of red and blue lights, but what unnerved me the most was that a full SWAT team arrived as well. Dozens of men poured into the home, guns drawn, which felt intense for what seemed like a mentally ill home invader. Within moments, they came out carrying a deranged-looking man in handcuffs. It wasn't until later on did I get the full details of the story. The man that they had arrested was indeed a mentally insane man, however, with a warrant for his arrest for the murder of his ex-wife, as well as the murder and mutilation of her dog. I also found later that the stench that was coming out of the room was his feces. It appeared he'd been trapped down there for several days, surviving off of only an old Gatorade bottle tossed down there by the last residents. He claimed he got himself stuck down there when he had initially broke into the cellar to elude police capture. It has been about 3 years since this incident, and its memory has become less and less intense with each passing day. However, some nights I lay awake at night, thanking God that I didn't let go of that cellar's ledge. In 2011, when I was 21, I went to visit my best friend Carly in Park City, Utah. When I arrived in Utah, Carly told me that she was having a barbecue with some friends at her place. Sundance Film Festival was in full swing, so we're going to eat and hang out and then go catch a few films. Around 5 p.m., friends started showing up with alcohol, meat for the grill, and snacks. I was introducing myself to several of Carly's friends and learning that most of the people who lived in Park City were there for the ski season as snowboarding and ski instructors and lifties, lift operators for the resort. As I was chatting with people, a guy walked through the front door and I couldn't help but stare. He was strikingly good looking. He looked like a male model. He had olive skin, light brown hair, and the perfect smile. The guy walked up to me and introduced himself as Matt. I said hello and then continued to mingle with everyone as Matt did the same. As a 21-year-old, I was very innocent and naive. I never really had a real boyfriend before, and this is why I thought it was exciting that Matt seemed to take notice of me. I'd look at him from across the room and he'd be staring at me. He'd give me a little wink and then go back to the conversation he was having. A little while into the barbecue, Matt came up to me and asked if I wanted to walk out to the garage with him to get more beer. The garage was separate from the house, and you had to walk down a flight of stairs and then across the snowy driveway to get to it. I said yes and proceeded to follow Matt out the door and down the stairs. Being very naive, I actually thought he just wanted a companion to go get beer with. When we reached the garage, we entered in and I walked over to the fridge. As I was opening the fridge door, it was slammed shut on me. Matt grabbed me and pushed me against the wall. He held my wrists down and began kissing me all over. I didn't quite know what to do because, like I said, I was very innocent and I had no experience with anything that was happening before. Matt let go of my wrists and started to unzip his pants. I put my hands up and said, "No, I don't want to do this." Matt grabbed me by the waistband and unzipped. Then he got down on his knees and looked up at me and said, "Come on, it'll be fun." I again told him no and pushed him away. He stood back up and started aggressively kissing me on my neck. He started to groan and then slammed his hand against the wall behind me and said, "Your fear makes me feel so good." And with that, He put his right hand around my throat and continued to kiss me. By this point, I was very scared and wanting him to stop. And what he said next still gives me chills. As he was still kissing my neck, he whispered in my ear, "Is it weird that I want to have my way with you and kill you at the same time?" My stomach dropped, and the hair stood up on the back of my neck. My mind was screaming to get out of there. As Matt started to tighten his grip around my throat, someone walked into the garage. Thank God for that person. Matt immediately stopped what he was doing and backed away. He barely made eye contact with me as he left. It was as if nothing happened. I went upstairs and cried in Carly's bathroom. I couldn't believe what had happened. Fast forward to 2016, I got a call from Carly asking if I remembered Matt from her BBQ. I stuttered at the thought of him, but told her I did remember him. She said, "You're not going to believe this. He was arrested on the suspicion of killing 6 women." My heart sank and I almost fainted. 6 women? How could this person be so stone-cold evil? I hung up the phone with Carly and sobbed on my couch. Had I really survived a serial killer 5 years earlier? I don't like thinking about what could have happened, but all I know is that if that person had not walked into the garage, it's very possible I could have made his murder list 7 women. I was 9 at that time, still in primary school. To give context, in the country I reside in, crime is practically non-existent. I've read many stories of women and children in other countries who are afraid of going out alone even in broad daylight, but I've had the privilege of never facing that fear. That was until that day. I was on my way to a friend's house for a group project. It wasn't far, only a 15-minute walk away. Yes, I traveled alone most of the time, especially if the location was close by. Most people in my country feel safe going to school alone as young as 7. To a lot of you, that may sound reckless, but that was how it was. Everyone felt safe. I had a phone, my first phone. Thing was, I didn't even have mobile data. I couldn't call my parents for help or anything if something had happened, nor could I alert my friends. I was walking alone along the road when I felt an eerie presence behind me. I've always been hyper-aware and a paranoid person, so I immediately turned to look around. A guy with a bright lime green shirt was on his motorcycle on the road. His motorcycle was white, a stark contrast to his blinding green top. I felt uneasy, so I picked up my pace. After walking for about another minute, I noticed that no one wearing green on a white motorcycle had driven past me. Obviously, vehicles would be faster than someone walking. He should have passed me by now. I looked back again. To my horror, he was still behind me. He was driving, but at a snail's pace, just enough to stay around 1 to 2 meters behind me as I walked. At this point in the story, I want to explain something. I was 9, but I've always been ahead of my peers in terms of development. I had accelerated a year in school and had a rather well-rounded body, let's just say. It was not uncommon for people to mistake me for being older than I actually am, but that does not excuse any harassing behavior, of course. I walked even faster than before, resisting into breaking into a sprint. I glanced behind me every few seconds. It was then I noticed he was glaring at my behind, and I was disgusted. Unfortunately for me, there was a traffic stop ahead, and I had to stop walking. Not surprisingly, instead of driving on like a normal person would, he just pulled over to the roadside. I stared at him, hoping he would get the message and go away, but he just started making kissy faces at me. He also kept gesturing me to come near him. Needless to say, I did not, and as soon as the traffic light turned green, I bolted all the way to my friend's house. On my way back to my friend's house, the incident had kind of evaporated from my mind. That was until I realized the guy was still tailing me. I was floored. How could he have known I was leaving my friend's house? Did he follow me all the way there? Did he wait that full 2 hours for me? All the way home, I walked as fast as my little legs could carry me. All along, he was making suggestive gestures at me and staring at my butt. I told my parents as soon as I reached home, and we filed a police report. They said they couldn't really do much about it because he didn't physically harm or touch me, but he would keep a lookout for the guy. I soon forgot about the incident. That incident happened during summer break, and you would think that that was just an isolated stalking incident. It was not. I started noticing the guy, same green t-shirt and motorcycle and everything around my school. It was like he was always there. Always. I couldn't understand how he knew what time I got dismissed from school and which gate I would leave the school from. I started leaving from other gates in hopes that he wouldn't see me, but he soon figured out what I was doing and started circling the school. Wisely, I had friends living near me, and I always went home with someone else. Me, being the cautious kid that I was, also managed to take down his license plate number. None of the kids at school believed me, and some even bullied me for faking the story to gain more attention. I suffered a lot through that school, but that's a story for another day. Well, one day I stayed back in school to do something. I can't quite remember what it was. All my friends, which was like 3, had left the school at that point, and it was late. It was the first time that I had walked home alone in a very long time. The green man on the motorcycle had kind of become a norm for me at that point, so I didn't think much of it when, surprise, he was once again at the school gate. For context, the pathway was right along the road and it was narrow. There was only one path that led me back to my house. I had to pass him to get home as he parked right along that road. I just tried to be as fast as possible, quickly walked past the green man. That was when he grabbed me. He grabbed me by the arm tightly and told me he had been watching me for a while and that I was very beautiful. He asked me for my number and tried to pull me onto his motorcycle. I knew that I was royally screwed. I was 145 centimeters, 9, a weak female with no weapon on me. He could drive away any time on his motorcycle and just drag me along. Thankfully, I was a psycho that watched violent shows and crime documentaries, even though I was 9, and I did the only thing I could think of. I kicked his nuts. Hard. He fell back in shock, almost knocking over his motorcycle. I then took my heavy school bag and threw it at him, bolted while screaming for help. Well, he had a motorbike and I was on foot. After recovering from the pain and the shock, he got back on his vehicle and started chasing me. Thankfully, me screaming for my life got the attention of a 12-year-old senior of mine who was too walking home. This guy was tall, 170 centimeters and pretty buff, especially for a 12-year-old. He was in our school's basketball club and learned Taekwondo. He pushed me to hide behind him. As this monster got off his motorcycle and told the boy to go away if he didn't want any trouble, he punched the guy square in the face. Suddenly scared, he ran back to his motorcycle and drove away. I went back to the initial location of the attempted kidnapping to retrieve my school bag, and the guy offered to walk me home. I told my parents what happened and we filed a second report. I also gave them the license plate that I had noted down. Nothing ever came of it. The police never called back and I never saw the green man again. And no, it didn't turn into some childhood romance story or anything. I didn't even become friends with the guy who saved my life. We just occasionally greet each other in school. The thing never became a big deal and he wasn't known as a hero or anything. The only thing that changed was I became slightly more psycho after that. I started learning archery and various knife handling skills. I never leave my house without a penknife at the very least in my bag. I still don't really fear going out alone, even stuffing both earphones in, seemingly oblivious to my surroundings, but my instincts never fail me. I've been stalked and approached by older men many times since, but I approached the incident not with fear, but with wisdom from my previous experience. A couple of times when they tried to lay a finger on me when I brought out my weapon, which thus far has been enough to scare them away. I always have 911 dialed on my phone if I feel an unsafe presence. I hope my story served as a cautionary tale. I'm still young now at 15, but much more aware of the dangers of the world. While I was going to college, I was living at home with my grandparents. My paternal grandparents have been my guardians since I was about 1.5, and they're basically my mom and dad. I live in the basement of their 3-bedroom condo in a newly minted condo community near the edge of our mid-sized city suburbs. The basement was a dugout style, so there were windows across the outside facing wall to the backyard, but they were low to the ground, so if you were to walk by said windows, the person in the basement could only see your feet. One late summer night, I awoke in my bed. This is fairly startling to me already, since I never wake up in the night. I listen intently to the sounds around me. I hear nothing but crickets outside my open window in my room. I get that you're a grown woman, stop thinking the boogeyman is after you thought and try to settle back into sleep when I hear it. Distant, aimless whistling coming out towards the main road that leads to the condo development. I try to listen past, my heart racing, to tell where the whistling was going. Our condo is one of the last units on the end of the property. If you were to cross by foot into the development from town, our backyard is the first you would walk across. It was the first time that placement made me feel exposed. That and my window was open. Sure, I still had a screen, but not much comfort to me at that time. Again, the I am a grown-up thought came to me and said, it's probably just some drunk guy wandering down the road. He's nowhere near your house and it's not a big deal. Go to sleep. So I try to just block out the noise and get to bed. But the whistling was also aimless, with no tune, just like it was trying to get attention. Not keep itself occupied or I have a song stuck in my head kind of whistle. I couldn't help but focus on it and hear it getting closer, and then I heard the footsteps. Aimless footsteps to go with the now horribly loud whistle. Are my grandparents not hearing this? I thought. I'm about to get up and go upstairs, but by this point, I am gripped with fear over the closeness of my late-night visitor and my open window, and it's only getting worse. Louder and closer until I'm sure the person is stepping on the stones that line the outside of my bedroom window, and with a whistle so loud I am sure it's them leaning down to look into the room. I bolt, covers off, and jump from the staircase. I thought I would feel safer up there, but it was little comfort. My mind went directly to the sliding glass door to the porch, the one with the staircase to the backyard. It's locked, right? I couldn't bear to even try to listen and see if I heard anything more. I bolted yet again, now to my grandparents' room. I was breathless and trying to wake my grandmother. It had to be an emergency to wake either of them, and you would think this situation would count as one. Well, Grandma was not having it, and instead was angry that I might wake up my grandfather. No one believes me, since I tended to have one of those wild imaginations people speak of. Well, maybe that was right. It was just me that heard it. Nevertheless, I slept on the upstairs couch after making sure the porch door was locked and taking a fireplace poker to sleep with. It wouldn't be a creepy story, though, without one final twist. About a few days later, my grandmother and I decided to go shopping. We took another road out that we do not normally use, so it's my first time seeing this street since the night of the whistling. I am in the passenger seat watching the condos pass by when I see one with police tape around it. Worn tape that you could tell was already slack from being up longer than 24 hours. "Grandma?" I asked. "What happened there?" "Oh, I didn't tell you?" she says nonchalantly. "A woman lives there by herself. A man broke into her basement window a couple of nights ago. I don't know the details, but her dog scared him off, I guess." I was quiet in the car for a moment while I was hoping my grandma would make the connection. "Grandma, do you remember when I came to your room a couple of nights ago, complaining about a man going past my window?" "No." "Never mind, Grandma. Never mind." I live in a small village in the middle of Oklahoma, and you can walk from one end to the other in less than 2 hours. One day back in 2019, beginning of my senior year of high school, I decided to walk home from school instead of getting a ride from a friend or my girlfriend. Yes, I know, sad, I don't have the money for a car. Bills are killing my money. Anyway, it's only a 2-mile walk from my school to my home on the other side of the village. I was walking on the main 2-way road that mostly goes uphill. It was a hot day, so I was sweating. I was cursing at myself for not getting a ride from a friend and being so stupid to walk 2 miles in 100 degrees. That's when a car pulled over and waved me over. The car looked familiar. I'd seen it around the school a few times. I thought it was one of my friends, so I rushed over and the passenger's side door swung open. I looked in, and it was a middle-aged, balding man. He asked me, "Hey kid, need a ride?" I kindly declined, saying, "No thanks, I can walk," and I waved him off. He didn't seem so thrilled with that response. With a slightly more agitated tone, he asked me again, "Hey kid, do you need a ride? It's hot outside." Again, I tell him, "No thanks, dude, I already said that." That's when he opened his door and screamed at me, "Get in the car right now." I felt a fear I'd never felt before. I slammed the passenger door shut, threw a rock at him to get him to stay in his car, and started to sprint towards traffic. He was yelling and cursing at me while I tried to wave down another car. No car stopped, but once I put at least 25 yards between me and him, he slammed his door and sped off. I ran and ran for 30 minutes, out of breath, to a restaurant on the side of the road and burst in. The lady behind the counter looked so concerned and called the police. I made a report and the cops drove me home. Now you think that'd be the last I'd see of the guy, right? No. I saw him at least a dozen more times around the town. He recognized me and would always give me a dead stare and a scowl. He got arrested a few weeks after the last time I saw him. I was there when it happened, but his eyes were so menacing, like he wanted to kill everyone he saw. It turned out that he was a convicted felon and wanted for murder and kidnapping. I'm thankful I never got in that car, and I'm thankful he never chased me. I'm thankful he gave up. I've always been skeptical about whether it's possible to see into the future, but I can't seem to make sense of an experience I had 20 years ago. As a teenage boy, I was prone to doing dumb things. My buddies and I decided to play a game called The Elevator, which consisted of purposely hyperventilating, and then one of the others would pin our chest against a tree until we passed out. We would only be out for a few seconds, but it felt like hours. My experience was different than the others, though. While I was out, I dreamed of the next 2 weeks. Except it wasn't like a dream. It felt like I had literally gone about my life as I normally would. It was so realistic that when I woke up, it quite literally felt like I had traveled back in time. The next 2 weeks played out exactly like they did while I was passed out. I considered myself to be an open-minded skeptic. So much of what I experience I can chalk off to coincidence and possible self-fulfilling prophecy. And here's what made my hair stand on the back of my head, though. After about a week, there was a brand new movie on TV. It was the first time it aired, so there was no way I could have seen it before. Except I did. In The Elevator. I spent the next few days terrified that at the end of the week I would wake up and start the process all over again. 20 years later, I still find myself nervous and excited that I may wake up in the past. To this day, I still have no idea what to make of my experience. For context, at this time I was 15 years old, a girl in 9th grade. My friend in the story, Casey, was in my grade, and the guy I will be talking about, Tom, was a grade above me. Casey was with Tom, and me and this Tom had gotten close. I was fine with this, and I never thought of it as anything more than a friend. He had started texting me. He and Casey broke up a few days later while I was texting him. Stupid. Never had a boyfriend. Me didn't see it as a red flag when literally 10 minutes after they broke up, he started flirting with me. Me and Tom started talking a few days later. Pretty terrible of me, I know. Everything went down between Tom and Casey, and I took Casey's side and stopped talking to him. A few months later, I get a text from him and we become friends again. He texted me all the time and was really clingy, but I can't lie, I enjoyed the attention. Around March of that school year, we started talking again and eventually got together. We dated for about 5 months, then I ended when I found out that he had cheated on me. Well, he kept coming back, and we were basically on and off again for the next 3 months. He had mentally abused me and kept me trapped, so that lasted until January of the next school year. I finally cut everything off, and he kept popping up. He joined everything I was in. He joined drama. If we were doing a new song in band, he would get on the instrument beside me. We were in percussion. It got so bad that I had to get the senior guys in percussion to keep him away. It got to the point where I got anxious around him, and he was everywhere. This is where I'm going to explain why I'm so anxious around him. Every time he got a sliver of alone time with me, he would touch me. I said no every time, and he stopped a few minutes, then he would try again. I would then just let him. I somehow forgot to mention that he also had a weird foot fetish, and that also freaked me out. And back to the story. My drama teacher knew what was going on, and she told the vice principal, and the principal talked to me. I'm the type of person that hates confrontation, and I didn't tell them about him touching me, but he did back off. Tom didn't really stay away, however. He did stop touching me. He believed that the drama teacher hated him and told lies since he doesn't believe that he's a creep and he thinks he doesn't do anything wrong, and he let him believe that. It was the last day of school, and I was sitting in a small room that only the yearbook staff could be in, and he opens the door, pops his head in, and asks me a question about a teacher, and I answer him in a cold tone. He then says, "Can I have a hug?" and holds out his arms. I glare at him and say no in the rudest way possible. School is out and his number is blocked. However, I had to give announcements to the drama kids, and I had to unblock him, and I forgot to block him back. A week later, I get a text from him, and it was basically asking how I was. Thankfully, I just never answered. I worked at a barbecue restaurant that is considered convenience food. Everything is homemade and we get fresh ingredients every day, but we work on the same timetable as fast food places. So you walk up, place your order at one of our registers, pay, and then wait 5 minutes and your food is ready. Given this, your face-to-face interaction with customers doesn't need to be super long. Keep this in mind whilst reading. I'm a female in my early 20s and pretty decent looking, so I'm accustomed to comments made by pervy old men or the occasional attempts at flirting made by guys that come up to my register. But only one customer has ever raised multiple red flags and set off all the alarms in my body telling me to run. The first time Jared came in was a few days after July 4th. One of my coworkers happened to be with me at the register. After placing and paying for his order, Jared talked to us about the holiday and how he's super excited. Normal conversation. Then he turns his attention only to me and tells me I look like a Barbie. Not an uncommon comparison, as I have blue eyes and, at the time, long blonde hair, but his compliments didn't stop there. He continuously repeated my likeness to the doll, adding in beautiful and stunning among other choice descriptors. His name was called for his food, so I thought the conversation had ended there. I was wrong. I was running around doing my side work when Jared came up to me at the counter and said that he had something to show me. I looked around to my coworker for help. They had taken note of how strange his comments were towards me, but none of them had noticed that he'd come back up. I put on my best customer service smile and followed him to his table. As mentioned, I worked at a barbecue restaurant, so there's barbecue sauce on all the tables. When I get to Jared's table, he's pointing at a spot on his plate where a fly was squirming in sauce that he had poured out. My first thought was that the fly landed in the sauce that he was using. I was about to apologize and get him a new plate when he said, "He landed there a few times before I finally got him." As he said this, he poured more sauce on the fly, laughing and smiling as he did so. Mortified, but also trying not to show how freaked out I was, I said, "Oh, you don't want to torture him now. Why don't you let him go?" Jared says, while still pouring sauce on the fly, "Nah, he's having a great time, can't you tell? Look at him swimming around." I know it was only a fly, but I couldn't look at it struggle anymore, and to be frank, he made me extremely uncomfortable right out the gate. Trying to be as polite as possible, I told him I had to get back to work. I told my manager Dana and a few other coworkers what he had done, and we all agreed it was disturbing and pretty weird. He didn't come up to the counter again until he was about to leave. He stared at me as he walked up, waved, and said, "Goodbye, Barbie. I'll see you soon." I hope he wouldn't. A few days later, Jared came in again. I was at the same register, talking with one of my coworkers. He comes up to order and starts discussing the 4th of July again, as it was the next day. We told him the restaurant is actually closed on the July 4th, so we were happy to have a day off. Again, normal conversation until he reaches over the register and grabs both our hands while speaking to us, saying it was amazing and we deserve a day off. At this point, he still hadn't ordered his food but was still holding our hands, so I changed the subject by asking what he'd like to order. He started ordering and had let go of my coworker's hand but still held on mine. I gently tugged my hand away, saying something like, kinda need that, type in your order. He looked incredibly mad when I did this, but quickly covered it with a short laugh. Thankfully, he got his food to go, so there wouldn't be another fly-drowning scenario I'd be witness to. After he paid, he left my register to go wait for his food, ending our interaction. A few minutes later, he comes back up to me, cutting off customers in line, and says, "Hey, did I ever show you a picture of my girlfriend?" I know my mind thought of the worst-case scenario, but as he pulled his phone out, I was convinced he was gonna pull up a picture of me. He didn't. It was a Facebook picture of a very busty woman in a very tiny American flag bikini. The entire time he was just staring at me, smiling, almost gauging my reaction. I just kind of laughed it off and responded with a, "Oh, that's cool." He puts his phone away, never breaking eye contact with me, and says, "Yeah, she's hot, but nowhere near as hot and beautiful as you are." I gave him a very quiet, thanks, and a nod. Fortunately, he left the restaurant a couple of minutes later, but only after he stared at me while walking away. Yes, the picture you have in your head is correct. This man walked sideways backwards as he walked out the doors and never took his eyes off of me. Once he got to the doors, he made it a point to stand and wave until I looked at him and waved back. Dana came up to me after he left, saying if he comes in again, she and I will have a code word and I'll go hide in the back until he leaves. She didn't like the way he talked to or about me. I was thankful she shared the same feelings, as I felt maybe I was being dramatic or my uneasiness wasn't warranted. The third and last time Jared came in, I was on the phone with a customer who was placing a large to-go order. The phones were directly behind the register, so there was no avoiding him. I was grateful I wouldn't have to take his order this time, but I also couldn't run and hide. It was bittersweet. I avoided eye contact with him as best as I could because I didn't want to talk with him if and when the phone call ended. It was working until he reached over the register he was at. My coworker Sarah was highly confused, waving his hand around trying to grab my attention. I reluctantly waved back and continued to take the phone order. I could hear Sarah ask him questions to get his order correct, but he was completely ignoring her questions because he was talking to her about me. "Isn't she a perfect Barbie? What a beautiful Barbie. A busy Barbie girl, isn't she? She's a beautiful girl." This continued even after the phone call ended. But instead of talking to Sarah about me, he thought it best to talk to me about my appearance. At this point, customers are starting to take notice at what was going on, and poor Sarah was stuck in the middle not knowing what to do. I did my best to ignore his words and just nod in hopes that he would get the message that I didn't care, as I was still doing some paperwork for the to-go order. He was incessant and still hadn't placed his order yet, so he had no reason to walk away from the register. To my relief, I heard my name being called from the office. I looked at him and said, "That's the boss calling me." And Jared responds, "Wow, you really are busy, a hard-working girl. Don't worry, Barbie. Go do your job." I left, feeling his eyes on me as I walked until I disappeared into the office. My general manager, Ron, told me Dana said to call me in because I needed rescuing. I was and still am very grateful for Dana. I briefly explained what was going on and who the guy was, and Ron looks at me and asks if I wanted Jared kicked out. I told him no, but I wanted to hide until he was gone. Ron told me that was fine and to stay in the office until he came to get me. He came back a few minutes later and said Jared was staring at the wall where the office was when he came out to see what Jared looked like. Ron packed up Jared's food and said he barely made eye contact, continuously glanced in the direction of the office, and was visibly angry the entire time. Ron said if he ever came in again to just abandon ship, go to the back, and stay there until someone told me the coast was clear. I never saw Jared again. This is almost a year ago, and my stomach still drops when I see a customer that even slightly resembles him. I'm a 26-year-old man, and I just had a really weird night. I've been thinking about submitting a story, and I guess this is that story. It's not really creepy at all, mostly just weird, but I might recommend not listening if you're particularly squeamish or emotional. I pulled an all-nighter last night, so I was already in a bit of a weird mental space, but a few hours ago, things got a lot stranger. I was relaxing in my room watching some live streams on YouTube, and everything was normal enough, but I started noticing some weird sounds in the background. At first I thought my mind might have been playing tricks on me, but I kept hearing them enough to be sure that there was something there. The sounds were kind of high-pitched, almost like scratching, so I thought that there might have been a big bug bumping its wings against the window. I didn't think much of it. It definitely didn't seem like a big deal, so I just put it in the back of my mind. But then I looked over and saw a big rat scurrying around the corner of my room, and it actually walked closer to me and stared right at me before scurrying off again. It actually stared at me so long that I had time to snap a picture. Well, I'm not easily freaked out by animals, so I wasn't scared or anything. At first I was kind of nonchalant about it, but then I realized that I now had to find some way to get this rat out of my room before it made itself too comfortable. Oh great, this will be fun. I put it off for a few minutes, but I realized that I wouldn't be able to properly relax until I'd taken care of the situation. I put on some long pants so the rat couldn't bite my leg, and then I started my mission. I knew which corner of my room he was in, so I did a bit of exploring and tracked him down. He was hiding in my bookshelf, squeezed into a narrow space on top of a stack of VHS tapes. I started realizing that this whole thing was actually a bit terrifying. I'd never tried to wrangle a rat before, and I realized that there was a significant chance that I might get bitten. I wasn't worried about the pain of the bite, but I really didn't want to be in the situation of having to worry about going to the hospital and getting like a rabies shot or something, but I needed this rat out of my room, so getting bitten was a risk I'd have to take. At first I wasn't sure how I was going to get him out, but I came up with a plan where I would wall off his escape routes so he would only go one way, and then I would trap him under a container and bring him outside. Well, everything went pretty much according to plan, but when he bolted out from his hiding place, I wasn't able to trap him before he scurried between my legs and out of my sight. Oh boy, now we were really off to the races. Instead of knowing where the rat was, now I had to track him down again, and he could be anywhere in my room. I really didn't want him making a nest somewhere, chewing on my stuff and leaving little turds as a souvenir, so I got right back to tracking him down. I knew it was going to drive me crazy if I didn't get him out of my room before I went to bed. Well, I started walking around my room, shining my flashlight everywhere and moving things around to make sure he wasn't hiding behind anything. It was pretty hot in my room, and the combination of running around my room while being on high alert meant that I was sweating like crazy and my heart was beating pretty fast. Some of the stuff I had moved around was settling, so I kept hearing noises from every direction. I felt like I was in the jungle of Nam or something, and I was rapidly losing my grip on little sanity that I had left after being awake for more than a full day and then chasing a rat around my room for hours on end. I felt like I'd checked every possible hiding spot at this point, but then I checked in the one last place, and bingo, there he was. He was hiding in a narrow space behind a few cabinets that sat near the wall. I think I hadn't checked there yet because it was only a foot or two from his original hiding space, and I was sure that he'd gotten much further than that. I'm not sure if he had been running around my room or if he had been behind these cabinets the whole time, but as soon as I found him, I felt a sudden shift. Of course, there was the satisfaction of finding his hiding space, but there was also a sad note. The rat went from being an evil mastermind who was sneaking around my room, always one step ahead of me, to being a scared little guy hiding in his tiny alcove, almost certainly completely terrified. This was no time for getting sentimental, though. I had a mission to complete. I moved a couple of things in front of his possible exits to make sure he had stayed put, and then I devised my plan. I made a little container that he could run into, and I figured I'd remove the obstacles and he'd scurry right into it so I could bring him outside and set him free. But when I set it all up, he didn't go for it. I think the space was so narrow that he didn't have room to turn around, so instead of running into my container, he just stayed where he was. That threw me for a loop, and I wasn't sure exactly how to proceed from there. I couldn't put my container on the side he was facing because the positioning was awkward and there wasn't enough room. I heard my dogs barking, so I knew I needed to take them outside for a bit, so I decided to wait for a little while and figure out what to do. But before I took my dogs out, I realized that there was something else I had to take care of. I had a power cord running through the space that the rat was hiding in, and I really didn't want him chewing through it while I was outside with my dogs. I lifted up the power cord and tried to yank it up from behind the cabinet, but it got stuck when I tried to lift it. I figured the cabinet was probably sitting on it, preventing it from moving. Oh well. I unplugged it so at least there was no power running through it, and then I took my dogs outside. When I got back, I went back into the room and checked up on my rat friend. As soon as I looked behind the cabinet, the rat wasn't on the ground anymore. He looked like he was a few inches above it, and it looked like he had somehow gotten himself wedged in a very narrow spot. I instantly knew something was wrong, and then I saw the power cord squeezed up against him. He wasn't moving. When I yanked up the power cord, it must have lifted him up and crushed him against the corner of one of the cabinets. You see, these cabinets are sectional and they can move independently, and I must have accidentally pushed one further back than I meant to. And that series of events meant that I had just taken a life. Yes, it was just a rat, but rats are living beings too. They have feelings and they're actually fairly smart. My heart sank and I knew that the accomplishment I'd get from completing my mission was now gone. It didn't count as a win because it definitely wasn't what I was trying to do. I wanted him out of my room, but I didn't want him dead. He was a cute little guy and he seemed like a good rat. When he first scurried out of his hiding place and stared at me, it almost seemed like he was being friendly. He didn't have any beef with me and I didn't have any beef with him, besides the fact that I wanted him out of my room. I immediately started thinking about how he died. At first I was worried that he had slowly suffocated while pinned against the cabinet, but when I looked at his body, I saw a wet spot that I'm pretty certain was a bloodstain. Hopefully that means it wasn't too long and drawn out, although maybe slowly asphyxiating would be better than being quickly crushed. I don't know. Well, now I was in a very different situation than I was a few minutes ago. At this point, it was 4 a.m, but I knew what I had to do. I took him outside and gave him a proper burial. I dug a small grave in the front yard so my dogs couldn't dig him up, and I said goodbye to my little rat friend. I could have buried him without touching him, but I felt the need to stroke his fur a little bit. I had just taken his life, and the least I could do was give him a few post-mortem pets. Yes, I know people say that rats have a weird bacteria and you shouldn't touch them. I was worried about that myself. I washed very thoroughly with soap and then rinsed with rubbing alcohol for good measure. As I was petting him, I told him I was sorry. I didn't mean to kill him, and he was a good boy. I looked down at him and his eyes still looked very alive somehow. I told myself he was just sleeping, very peacefully. I didn't want him to get dirt in his eyes or ears, so I put a leaf over his head to shield him, and then I filled in the grave. As I was burying him, the name Timmy popped in my head. At first I thought it was just silly. I figured that it was probably a reflex on my part that I wanted to humanize him, so I gave him a common name for a pet. But then I realized that there was a weird coincidence that made that name very fitting. I've been listening to a radio show earlier that night of a guy named Dave McGowan being interviewed by Ed Opperman. They were talking about the 1960s countercultural movement, and they mentioned that Timothy Leary had connections to the CIA, and he apparently ended up snitching on people. Someone said even back in the 70s I was already hearing the word on the street that Timothy was a rat. So there you have it, the whole drawn-out saga. It might not be the most interesting story, but it's probably the most eventful thing that happened to me recently. It went from being a weirdly intense rat hunt to a tender and tragic moment that made me reflect on life. If I had managed to successfully get Timothy out of my room alive, I'm not sure what his life would have been like. My brother has a cat that kills rodents fairly often, so I think there's a decent chance that my rat friend would have met that fate. I don't think many rats manage to die peacefully of natural causes. Maybe this was all for the best. Hopefully Timothy's death was quick and relatively painless, and he's up in rat heaven now, munching on the biggest block of cheese imaginable. Hey friends, thanks for listening. Click that notification bell to be alerted of all future narrations. If you got a story, be sure to submit them to my subreddit, r/Let's Read Official, and give and receive feedback from the community, and maybe even hear your story featured on the next video. And join my Discord to interact with me and other listeners directly. And if you want to support me even more, grab early access to all future narrations for just $1 a month on Patreon, and maybe even pick up some Let's Read merch on Spreadshirt. And check out the Let's Read podcast, where you can hear all these stories in long compilation form and save huge on data. Located anywhere you listen to podcasts. Links in the bio. Thanks so much, friends. And remember, all hail Timmy the Rat.